The Subcommittee on Research and Science Education will come to order. Good morning. Welcome to today's hearing entitled The Role of Research Universities in Securing America's Future Prosperity, Challenges and Expectations. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the challenges faced by the nation's research universities. The hearing will provide an opportunity to discuss the future outlook for these universities and to discuss the recently released National Academy study, Research Universities and the Future of America. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biography, and truth in testimony disclosures for today's witnesses. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. We are pleased to welcome our witnesses to discuss the challenges faced by the nation's research universities, as well as the findings and recommendations from the June 14th report issued by the National Academy's Research Universities and the Future of America. I think we all can acknowledge the importance of our nation's research institutions. Therefore, I look forward to working with my counterparts on the subcommittee to review measures that Congress, the federal government, state governments, research universities, and industry can take to improve these vital resources. Innovation has remained a part of the fabric of this nation since its founding, particularly in today's tough economic times. Research universities play a vital role in America's ability to maintain its competitiveness in an increasingly technologically developed world. And the knowledge and skills produced by our nation's research graduates provide the fuel for these endeavors. The Morrill Act of 1862, signed by President Lincoln, established a partnership between the federal government and the states to build land-grant institutions that would address the challenges of creating a modern agricultural and industrial economy for the 20th century. This partnership continues with an even broader support of the nation's educational, research, and economic endeavors. 3 of our distinguished witnesses today come from these land-grant institutions. It is my understanding that other vice presidents for research from a number of these land-grant institutions are in the audience today, as they are all in town to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Morrill Act. To them, I offer a special welcome and thank you for your hard work and dedication. According to the recently released National Academy's report, requested in 2009 by now full committee Chairman Ralph Hall and other members of Congress to identify the top 10 actions to be taken in order to maintain the excellence of United States research and doctoral education, America's research universities have emerged as a major national asset which supports the nation's economic goals, among many other things. The challenges faced by these institutions were discussed in the report range from unstable revenue streams and antiquated policies and practices to increasing competition from universities abroad. Today, we will continue to examine the future outlook for these universities while taking into account the recommendations from the National Academy's report. I look forward to a comprehensive discussion with our witnesses, and I thank them for taking the time out of their busy schedule to help the subcommittee with this important oversight role. The chair now recognizes Mr. Lipinski from the great state of Illinois for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Brooks, and thank you for holding this hearing, and thank the witnesses for being with us today. And I think this is probably the biggest audience that we've had here for a hearing, so that's good to see. I fully agree with Chairman Brooks' comments about the importance of the Morrill Act. Its passage 150 years ago was undoubtedly an important milestone in our country's history. Research universities are extremely vital to our nation's vital part of our nation's R&D infrastructure and are thus critically important to America's future economic success. And that means American jobs, which is especially important today when everyone is asking us where are the jobs going to come from. They're going to come from innovation really to pretty significant extent, and I think we could do more with that, comes from our research universities. I understand all this from personal experience as a student and assistant professor at some of our nation's finest research universities. I never pass up an opportunity to name them: Northwestern, Stanford, Duke, University of Tennessee, and Notre Dame. I appreciate the opportunity to explore in depth the challenges all of our research institutions currently face and discuss possible steps that both the government and universities can take to help address these challenges. Research universities' contributions to the health, security, and prosperity of the American people cannot be overstated. Advances in the fields of medicine and biotechnology, the development of critical new military technologies, and countless economically important companies and products can be traced back to research conducted in university labs. In addition to contributing immeasurably to our economic prosperity and well-being, research universities also train the next generation of scientists, engineers, and innovators. For anyone who's interested in the role that the federal government played in starting up Silicon Valley by funding research at Stanford University, you should read online at steveblank.com. He has a secret history of Silicon Valley, which is very interesting. Now, that's military funding, but we're looking at all federal funding here, but a lot of people don't understand the role that federal funding does play at our research universities. And then, as you see with the history of Silicon Valley, that a lot of people think that was all private, but much of that was originally started from public funding. More broadly, university-government partnership that began 150 years ago with the Morrill Act has been critical to making many of these contributions possible. The federal government's support of academic research and patent laws that expedite the commercialization of such research have helped make many of our research universities the best and most productive in the world. Today, a number of countries are attempting to emulate our system, and they are increasingly competing with us to attract the world's top talent. Unfortunately, I say this at a time when research universities face acute challenges that threaten their ability to continue to provide a world-class education and help ensure the United States remains the global leader in innovation. The financial stress and resulting budget deficits our country has faced in recent years have forced the federal government to back away from bipartisan commitments to significantly increase support for basic research at universities. At the same time, public universities have received less financial support from state governments, putting increased pressure on funding sources like tuition to make up the difference. Despite the fiscal challenges we face, we in government cannot afford to jeopardize our nation's future prosperity by not providing sustained and predictable support for scientific research and affordable education. At the same time, I believe that research universities need to adjust to this new fiscal environment by finding new and innovative ways to operate. I also believe that it remains well within the ability of our universities to continue to deliver a top-notch education, allow creativity and innovation to thrive, and attract some of the best researchers and students from around the country and the world. In closing, there are a couple of issues in particular that are raised in the NRC report that I look forward to discussing today. First, I'm very interested in hearing about efforts to accelerate the pace at which discoveries make their way from lab to the market, and we welcome your thoughts on how the federal government can help you in these efforts. Also, I'd like to hear about any initiatives at your universities aimed at addressing the high attrition rate of students in STEM subject areas and the need for greater diversity. Related to that, I'd like to learn more about how you're working with industry to make sure you're graduating students with the skills that they need in the workforce. Thank you again, Chairman Brooks, for holding this important hearing. I look forward to productive exchange with our witnesses. With that, I will yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our witness panel for today's hearing. Our first witness is Mr. Charles O. Holliday, Jr., Chair of the Committee on Research Universities for the National Research Council of the National Academies. Mr. Holliday currently serves as the Chairman of the Board for the Bank of America Corporation. From 1998 to 2008, he served as the Chairman of the Board and Chief Executive Officer for DuPont. Our second witness, I have a particular fondness in this area, although I'm an Alabama grad, as is my wife. My sons and my money went to Auburn University. They got good engineering degrees, I'll add. But our next witness is Dr. John Mason, Jr., Associate Provost and Vice President for Research for Auburn University. He is responsible for the university's research program development, sponsored programs, and technology transfer and communications initiatives. Prior to joining Auburn University, Dr. Mason was the Associate Dean for Graduate Studies, Research and Outreach in the College of Engineering at Penn State University. Our third witness, I want to welcome him to the Southeastern Conference, but without further ado, I'm going to yield to Chairman Hall to introduce him more fully. Chairman Hall is Chairman of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee and from the great state of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored to get to introduce Dr. Seaman and to welcome you, doctors, as Vice President for Research at Texas A&M University and Chief Research Officer for the Texas A&M University System. I'm pleased to introduce you, and I'm trying to do it exactly as John Sharp instructed me to. And with his help of getting my wayward daughter into Texas A&M, she's waiting for it to start. She may be in the crowd somewhere here. I hope you'll see her through, Doctor, and be considerate with her and patient. All she wants is a degree. But, off the record a little, we have Texas A&M at Commerce and Texas A&M at Texarkana in my district in great schools. Texas A&M at Commerce was, at one time, East Texas State Teachers College. I changed it when I was in the Texas Senate to East Texas State College. At that time, my wife graduated from there, and I spoke to the student body at their graduation and got to hand her degree. I almost made her reach for it 2 or 3 times, but I knew better than to do that. But as president, and the Texas A&M at Texarkana is doing wonders. But my wife didn't seek the diploma, Texas A&M diploma. She kept her the East Texas State University, and that way that prohibited me from beginning to sleep with an Aggie. I was both proud and apprehensive for that. But as Vice President, Dr. Seaman worked with faculty, staff, and administrators to expand and enhance the university's $700 billion plus research enterprise, which is quite a task. Prior to that, to coming to A&M, he served as Dean of the College of Environment and Life Sciences at the University of Rhode Island. Dr. Seaman, we thank you for being here and joining us today, as we thank each one of you. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Mason, I'd be remiss if I didn't add, not only did my money go to Auburn and my sons get degrees, but they have jobs. That is very important to a dad. Our fourth witness is Dr. Leslie P. Tolbert, Senior Vice President for Research at the University of Arizona. As Vice President, she supports the creative activities of a $611 million research enterprise, promotes the application of new discoveries and innovations, and oversees the graduate programs of the university. Dr. Tolbert served on the faculty of the Georgetown University School of Medicine before joining the University of Arizona. On a side note, one of my daughters is a teacher in South Carolina. We have an 1,100 square foot, 2-bedroom condo in Washington, D.C. My wife and I, my daughter brought 6 people from South Carolina with her, teachers, and I can give you the play-by-play of Arizona's win over those Gamecocks on Monday night. And I wasn't watching the game. But they were really talking to that TV. Congratulations on your national title in baseball. Our final witness is Dr. James Cito, Vice Provost for Research at Duke University. I love this panel. I'm a graduate of Duke University, and that's where I met my wife, most importantly, so thank you, Duke University. Dr. Cito became a full professor of botany in 1987 and a professor of biology in 2000. And has been Vice Provost for Research since 2001. A recipient of the Trinity College Distinguished Teaching Award, Dr. Cito's research is represented by more than 120 publications. And am I pronouncing that correct? Is it Cito or Cito? Cito. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you, Dr. Cito. As our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes to ask questions. I now recognize our first witness, Mr. Charles Holliday. Mr. Holliday, you are recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Chairman Brooks, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today representing the National Academies and my 22 colleagues on the committee. A point of reference, as the National Academy went out to seek this committee, they only had to call 23 people. So it gives you a feel for how important it was to these very busy cross-section of business leaders and academic leaders to be a part of this work. As you've pointed out our report, if you look at our entire title, it's actually 17 words. And I know people will want to shorten our title, so we have a suggestion. We would like to call it the Prosperity Report. And if you'd like a long title, you can call it the Prosperity and Security Report. Because what I'd like to present to you today is because of our nation's research universities that we enjoy such prosperity and security today, and we hopefully laid out a plan to continue that, and I believe my colleagues on this panel here today will reinforce that. Let me briefly talk about the findings we had and then some of our recommendations, particularly those that we think are actionable right away. The good news is we have a commanding lead in research universities in the world. 35 to 40 of the top 50 are in America, and that is extremely strong. And as I mentioned earlier, that is contributing greatly to our prosperity. But I must report to you, we also found that our public universities are on thin ice. The cuts in funding, 25% on average since 2002 to 2010, some as high as 50%, are straining them significantly. And we believe we're in jeopardy of losing that strength, and so many of our recommendations speak directly to the importance of them and what we must do. Keep in perspective that 60% of the federally funded research comes from those public universities and 70% of our PhDs, so they're absolutely critical to the system. The key product, and you've mentioned this in your opening comments, are the talent, the people that come out, and the discoveries. And so we must be focused on both of those because that's critical to our success. I'd like to comment some about the role of business. I served for 37 years with the DuPont Company. 11 years I was fortunate enough to serve as the chairman and chief executive officer. Our company was started by a university-trained French immigrant who came here 210 years ago. And the reason DuPont is still a leading company today is because of our focus on research and because of our tight link with research universities. I'd like to tell you just a very brief story from my experience there. I was having a dinner with a researcher who was receiving his 100th patent that year. And we were having a discussion about what our direction should be around broad discovery research or focused research. I was insisting on more focus because we had to deliver to our owners. And when he asked me, well, then where will we get this broad research? I said, we'll get it from our research universities. He agreed, but he said, what if they're not there? And my response was, they must be. And I can tell you from our 2 years of working on this committee, the answer is they must be. It is so critical to our prosperity and security, and we think a key role is to how to make that happen. If I could just comment briefly on some things we can do that don't necessarily take money. Obviously, our report requires some money, but we think there's things we could do today. And you look at the bureaucracy that has built up over time, the regulations that we put on my colleagues here on this panel. We believe there are things we could do to streamline that, still get the right controls to make sure the taxpayers' money is being spent carefully, but we believe we could reduce that with time. We have the same message for the states because they have put too much on it to make a difference. Second, we believe the business role is very important. Indeed, business does take the talented students, and we license the great discovery research. The universities like that. They want us to give jobs to their students. They want us to use their research. But what we found from our work is too much of a buyer-seller relationship. We want businesses very actively involved, so they're listening to the universities and guiding universities about what skills do students need to create jobs, what discoveries can they actually commercialize and create jobs. We think that's very important. We believe as you do that, you should take a hard look at the R&D tax credit. We think it should be made permanent, but make it permanent in a very smart way. Reward companies that will have a 10-year relationship with the university, the colleagues here on this panel, so they can plan and we can plan. I think that would start a different system, and I believe you can look at other countries in the world, it's key. We believe funding cyber infrastructure is critical. We can believe that will do a lot to improve the productivity at universities, which is a big thing that we can deal with. If I could focus on just one last example, 55% of the PhD engineering students in this country have temporary visas. And we must find a way to keep them in this country. We must also work on STEM so more of those are native-born Americans. But as you think about keeping this country, I'd like to leave you with one thought. You have one PhD researcher. From my experience at DuPont, he likely will have 1 or 2 assistants that does the more routine test. In today's information technology world, he'll almost have a full-time information technologist helping sort the data, and then there's maintenance facilities on the equipment. You can easily then create 5 jobs for every PhD, and this is in the discovery stage. Once you get to the commercialization stage, obviously it's many-fold that. So these positions are not just great for discovery, they're really great for a broad mass of jobs. We present to you the Prosperity Report. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Holliday. Next, we have Dr. Mason from Auburn University. Dr. Mason, you now have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Brooks, Ranking Member Lipinski, Chairman Hall, and other members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's panel. My name is John Mason. I do serve as the Vice President for Research at Auburn University. You may have heard it said that research is to teaching as walking is to running. You have to do the first in order to do the second. If we want robust learning in this country, all the way from kindergarten to postgraduate level, and throughout business and industry, it starts with the creation of new knowledge. To put today's discussion in context, I offer the findings of a December 2011 report from Battelle and the R&D magazine. They find that Asia, for the first time, will this year surpass the Americas in their share of total global research and development spending. The long-term implications for U.S. prosperity and security are profound. Research, along with our missions of instruction and outreach, is part of Auburn's balanced attempts at enhancing competitiveness of our future leaders and our workforce. We focus on 5 strategic areas at Auburn. They're all interdisciplinary: energy and environment, health science, cyber systems, transportation, and the STEM disciplines, those of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We continuously work in partnership with federal agencies, business and industry to accomplish issues that are of national need. Auburn has produced breakthrough scientific discoveries as the vapor wake canine that now screens passengers and cargoes for explosives, and also very proud that we educate such leading technology innovators as Apple CEO Tim Cook. A priority research area right now at Auburn has been and continues to be security, the security of our cyber infrastructure, food supply, and energy resources. In that context, we view relevant fundamental research as the underpinning of industry. At Auburn, we've been referring to this as putting ideas to work. Relevant fundamental research is that which industry can apply to innovate and create products and services. Our Auburn model combines technology transfer. We have created and sustaining and incubating startup companies, a research park where technology transfer businesses are flourishing, and close collaboration with not-for-profit foundations. Although these elements are not unique, very common among our universities throughout the United States, the key to all our successes is how they work together for some goal and function not as independent silos. Throughout this process, we pay particular attention to commercializing our inventions, one of the best ways of moving new knowledge and creating jobs. Mr. Chairman, we believe that the recently released National Academy report has some insightful recommendations, and in the balance of the time, some quick response from Auburn University. We recognize and embrace the oversight and transparency that is necessary with public funds. However, on certain areas where there are redundant reviews and audits, it appears that they are focusing on process rather than on results. Regarding recommendation number 4 on university productivity, I can assure you we will remain vigilant in seeking and addressing efficiencies. It is important, however, to recognize that once the storehouse of academic and research mindsets are eliminated, they are unlikely to be reinstored in the future. Recommendation number 5 deserves serious attention. Long-term partnerships and our relationship with business and industry will remove the uncertainty and will focus us on long-term items of national need. Unfortunately, short-term shifting of national priorities creates a perverse incentive to chase funding rather than chase the discovery that will create jobs in the United States. In closing, I urge the committee to consider the potential of the National Defense Education Act of 1958. It was at that point in time where we were focusing on space. The federal government helped pay tuitions for those with advanced scientific and engineering degrees, and it helped to focus our research on areas of national need. While the national concern at that time was space, today it's the economic issues. Tuition waivers would be a very inexpensive way to accomplish research and economic development activities on national needs. Mr. Chairman, we are confident that the relevant fundamental research enables teaching, enhances our learning, and is a job creator. Thank you for examining these important issues, and I thank you for the opportunity to provide my testimony.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Our next witness is Dr. Seaman. Dr. Seaman, you have 5 minutes.
Chairman Brooks, Ranking Member Lipinski, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Research and Science Education, my name is Jeff Seaman, and I have the privilege of serving as both the Vice President for Research at Texas A&M University and as the Chief Research Officer for the Texas A&M University System. I want to begin by thanking you for the chance to come before you today to present testimony on critically important issues relating to the challenges and opportunities facing our nation's research universities. And I want to specifically commend your leadership for making this hearing possible. I would also like to extend my thanks to a fellow Texan, Congressman Ralph Hall, Chair of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Chairman Hall continues a long and distinguished tradition of Texas leadership on science education and policy going back to Alan Tiger Teague, who chaired the precursor to today's committee in the 1960s when Texas A&M made its bold move to join the nation's major research universities. And I note that the portrait of Tiger Teague hangs over Chairman Hall's left shoulder. Today, Texas A&M stands among the nation's top 20 research universities, and its rapid rise to Tier 1 research status owes a great deal to the strong foundation provided by the state of Texas, to the institution's land-grant roots, to its heritage as a military institution, and to major investments from the federal government. The release of the National Research Council's report on research universities and the future of America offers an important opportunity to revisit, reevaluate, and re-energize the state of the university government R&D partnership, a partnership that has helped make Texas A&M and our peers across America the great research universities that they are today. It is remarkable how much of the prosperity of our nation, its economic success, its leadership in innovation, and its world leadership has flowed from the R&D pipeline that originates with this partnership, a partnership fueled by the taxpayers of our states and nation, and catalyzed by the ideas and discoveries of our faculty. The productivity of our research universities and our nation are inextricably linked. This is why we must recommit to and reinvest in this partnership. I suggest that we can achieve rapid progress through the following 4 complementary actions, all reflected in the NRC's recommendations. First, research universities must take bold and aggressive steps to collectively and strategically focus on solutions to grand research challenges and areas of key national interest. By prioritizing investments of internal resources into these areas and breaking down traditional academic and organizational barriers that may stand in the way of this goal. Second, federal agencies must continue, if not increase, support for these research priorities of shared national interest, particularly with targeted grant monies and support for young investigators and infrastructure development. Third, research universities must take greater action to ensure that we utilize resources even more efficiently and transparently than we already do, aggressively eliminating unnecessary and redundant administrative activities and barriers in order to make the most of limited resources. And fourth and finally, federal agencies and regulators must in turn act to reduce or eliminate unnecessary, overly burdensome, redundant, and costly regulatory and reporting obligations placed on the research operations of universities and faculty. I promise you that we can do so without sacrificing accountability or safety. By keeping our sights set on high-priority current and future national and global problems. By investing in and focusing on solutions and impacts, and by ensuring the efficient use of resources, we will guarantee the continued productivity of our world-class R&D pipeline. Alternatively, our nation runs the risk of ceding its current leadership and innovation to other countries and reaching a plateau in our research competitiveness. This we cannot afford. Texas A&M, with our long history of public service and a research enterprise that is dedicated to serving the national interest, looks forward to reaffirming our commitment to this partnership and to working diligently in collaboration with you and federal agencies to ensure that we can continue in the 21st century to serve and meet our nation's needs in the same highly successful way we did in the 20th century. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Seaman. Our next witness is Dr. Tolbert from Arizona University. Dr. Tolbert, you may now proceed with your 5 minutes.
Chairman Brooks, Ranking Member Lipinski, Chairman Hall, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the importance of the research being conducted in our nation's research universities. My name is Leslie Tolbert. I'm Senior Vice President for Research at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona. Innovation driven by educated people drives our nation's economy. The astounding research and education accomplishments in U.S. universities have been the backbone of our country's economic competitiveness, high living standard, and national security since World War II. During that time, the federal government has taken the lead in supporting this innovation, providing resources to universities to conduct research and graduate education in the national interest. In recent years, this essential research support has not kept pace with research opportunities or with international investment. At the same time, state support available to cover research costs in the public universities has declined precipitously. Private industry, traditionally another important source of research, is focusing increasingly on applied research and development, leaving to the universities most of the fundamental research and the unexpected discoveries that provide the foundation for all future applications. How can the federal and state governments, the universities, and the private sector work together to ensure the long-term health of university-based research, which is the essential starting point for the innovation pipeline? The recently released NRC report, Research Universities and the Future of America, or the Prosperity Report, makes some good suggestions. I'm here today representing one of our nation's large public research universities on the 150th anniversary of the first Morrill Act, which established the public land-grant universities. The University of Arizona is a large, comprehensive land-grant university of 39,000 students. With annual research spending over $610 million, we rank among the top 20 public research universities in the nation. We consistently rank first or second in the physical sciences overall and are among the top 4 universities in space sciences. Among other accomplishments, we design and build the largest telescope mirrors in the world, and we're the only public university to have served as mission control for a NASA mission, this one to Mars. We also provide for the state and the nation leadership in smart agricultural water use and genetically based pest control and in advanced mining technologies. Approximately 27% of the University of Arizona's operating expenses go to support research. Our total revenues are roughly 1/6 from state appropriated funds, 1/4 from student tuition and fees, and the remainder from other sources, including externally sponsored grants and contracts, gifts, and investment income. Sponsored grants and contracts come primarily from federal agencies, including the National Institutes of Health, NASA, National Science Foundation. Support from the state of Arizona has fallen very steeply in recent years. Our university's state support has fallen from 32% to 15% of our budget in the past decade, with a reduction of almost $180 million in just the past 5 years. We are over $200 million behind in building renewal funds. With that reduction, our faculty number has dropped by 60, and in the last year, and older research buildings are being taken offline because of inadequate maintenance, even as our student population continues modest growth. As state support declines and the competition for federal funding gets tougher, efficiency and careful planning are more important than ever for us. We're using our limited resources strategically to support areas of research and education in which we already are clear leaders or where we have clear potential to be competitive for projects that will have a major impact on society. And still also to provide relevant undergraduate and graduate education to students from diverse backgrounds. Fundamental exploration and discovery is at our core, but we also work increasingly to push new findings out to practical application as quickly as possible, especially through expanding our industry relations to true partnerships. Increasingly, we perform research in large consortia where partners share expertise and share resources as an efficient mode of operation. Toward bolstering the cutting-edge research and education in our universities, we endorse several specific recommendations from the NRC report. First, federal and state agencies must understand and support the absolutely critical role played by university-based fundamental research in the continuum from fundamental research through applied research and development to new product development. New knowledge is the seed corn for the rest of the R&D system. Without new ideas and insights, progress won't happen. Not targeted to particular application, fundamental research has impacts that are unpredictable and may not occur for years or decades. But that research is essential and has the power to transform society. Second, universities should be able to recover as fully as possible the full costs of funded research, including full reimbursement of the so-called overhead costs that are intended to reimburse universities for the necessary expenditures that collectively support their research. This reimbursement has fallen behind over recent years, leaving the universities having to subsidize federally funded research with other funds. For many public universities, state funds continue to be key here, but declining state support makes this increasingly difficult. And finally, regulatory controls on federally funded research should be streamlined as much as possible to minimize the administrative burden on both the federal government and the universities and maximize the impact of federal funds spent on university research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tolbert. Dr. Cito, it's now your turn for 5 minutes. You may proceed.
Chairman Brooks.
Excuse me, turn on your microphone.
Oh, sorry. Chairman Brooks, Ranking Member Lipinski, Chairman Hall, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for your efforts to highlight research universities and the important role these institutions play in our nation's security and economic prosperity. I am Jim Cito, Vice Provost for Research at Duke University, and I'm grateful for the invitation to be part of this critical discussion. This is clearly a very important topic, not simply for those of us sitting at this table, but also for the nation as a whole, and I think it is very encouraging that our elected officials, including the 3 Duke alums who sit on this committee, see the NRC report and this topic is sufficiently important to hold this hearing. It has been said several times already, but cannot be reiterated enough, that one of the cornerstones of the success of the United States has achieved as a nation over the past 150 years since the enactment of the Morrill Act has been the partnership between the federal government and research universities, operating under the notion that universities, with the support of federal and state governments, would provide the fundamental research and new discoveries that would drive the development of new technologies, which in turn would underpin the nation's economy. That was true in 1862. It was even more so in 1945 when Vannevar Bush eloquently restated the case in Science, the Endless Frontier, and it is even more true today when we are locked in a struggle to maintain the primacy of our nation and its economic system in the face of very steep competition. We believe the NRC report does a very good job of making the case of the need to reaffirm and revitalize this unique federal university partnership. No less important, however, is the case the report makes for the need to strengthen the linkages between research universities and industry. Many people have made note of the fact that in the aftermath of the dismantling of the large corporate research laboratories which drove much of this nation's industrial leadership in the 20th century, universities and industry have yet to come together in a way that fills the resulting gap. While most research universities today can point to successful examples of interaction with industry, in some cases interactions of large consequence, for the most part, industry comes to universities today when they have a question they want answered or a problem solved, reducing the partnership to more of a fee-for-service transaction and less of a union of co-equals trying to address a corporate grand challenge or move a university discovery beyond the so-called valley of death and into the marketplace. The large corporate laboratories of the past were masters at translating basic research discoveries into practical applications. Research universities today are hotbeds of basic discovery, but remain somewhat slow and undercapitalized when it comes to translating these discoveries into useful applications. In light of this situation, what is clearly needed is a new partnership between industry and research universities that is designed to address these shortcomings. As outlined in the NRC report, the federal government is best positioned to broker this partnership and to help bring about a more collaborative and, to quote the NRC report, peer-to-peer set of interactions between the two entities. As has also been pointed out in previous testimony, a major challenge facing universities relates to costs associated with the growing number of research-related compliance regulations that have flowed down from federal agencies over the past 15 or so years. Most of the costs of administering these regulations have had to be borne directly by the university. To take Duke as an example, the research-related and quality assurance costs to Duke between the year 2000 and 2010 rose over 300%, at the same time that our direct and indirect costs only increased 130%. In addition to presenting the university with a challenge of continually keeping up and paying for new regulations, operationalizing our compliance responsibilities in many cases means flowing down these additional responsibilities to our research active faculty. This has led to negative responses on the part of the faculty who see more of their time being committed not to carrying out funded research, but to a myriad of mundane administrative duties. This is not to suggest that these regulations are unwarranted, only that the extreme to which some of these regulations have gone of late seems well beyond what that needed to accomplish the original regulatory end. We support the recommendation in the NRC report that a thorough review of these regulations is in order. Finally, while not a committee recommendation per se, the overarching tenor of the NRC report and the development of my testimony for this hearing led me to ask whether another potential outcome of this assessment of the partnership between research universities and the federal government might not include a call for a formal look at the country's fundamental research portfolio in light of the future strategic needs of the country. In essence, does the current distribution of federal support for basic research align or not with where technology will most need to be advanced in the future if the country is to maintain its competitive scientific and technological edge? I thank you for your time and interest, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. C. Doe. I want to thank the panel for their testimony, reminding members that committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes. The chair at this point will open the round of questions. Normally the chair would recognize himself first, but in this instance I'm going to exercise the chair's prerogative and recognize a superior chair, Ralph Hall from the great state of Texas. Mr. Hall, you're recognized.
With that description, I'm not sure you've recognized the right guy, but I thank you for it, and I thank you for being a chairman that recognizes the importance as this full room indicates of the subject matter we're talking about today. As a matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, some 3 or 4 years ago, back to be exact, June 22nd, 2009, Bart Garden, who chaired Science, Space, and Technology for 8 years and a wonderful chairman, an unusual Democrat, and I was a ranking member at that time. There were 2 senators, Barbara Mikulski and Lamar Alexander, that signed this letter on June 22nd, 2009, and addressed to Dr. Ralph Cicerone, President of the National Academy of Sciences, and Dr. Charles M. Vest, President of the National Academy of Engineering, Dr. Harvey V. Feinberg, President of the Institute of Medicine. They may be in the audience, some of them, I'm not sure, but they certainly know about this hearing. And we wrote to them asking what are the top 10 actions that Congress, state governments, research universities, and others could take to assure the ability of the American Research University to maintain the excellence in research and doctoral education needed to help the United States compete, prosper, and achieve national goals for health, energy, and environment and security in the global community of this 21st century. That was our letter. Unlike the problem Darrell Ice is having of getting any letters out of the Attorney General, they answered back quickly, and their answer was this: research universities and the future of America, the summary there, the 10 breakthroughs, and one by one took them as they were asked. And I have really questions I want to ask Mr. Holliday, Dr. Holliday, but I want to ask Dr. Seaman first. In your testimony, you stated that, quote, each research university must leverage its respective assets and capacities to pursue those challenge areas that best fit their strengths, then aggressively adjust investments and priorities around their home field advantages, unquote. How has Texas A&M identified those assets, and how have they handled those capacities?
Well, thank you for the question, and let me also commend you for your vision in asking the National Academy to deliver this report, and let me also promise you that I will look closely after your family at Texas A&M University.
Okay. Just so she passes.
As we say in Texas, yes, sir. Texas A&M was born as a great institution of agriculture and engineering, and absolutely remains so. And we have continued to grow on those strengths. More recently, we have begun to focus on the 21st century, I think the century that is increasingly about biology and the life sciences, and begun to parallel developments in that arena. And over the past 6 to 7 years, the state of Texas has made important and critical infrastructure investments in this arena in very state-of-the-art facilities for preclinical studies, for genomic medicine, and most recently for a National Center for Therapeutics Manufacturing that have built on much of our capacity. And that was rewarded, as you may know, last week in Texas by the announcement of a $285 million award from Health and Human Services Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority to do development and production of vaccines for emerging medical threats, including pandemic flu and bioterror potentials. And again, that has come from our institution recognizing what its strengths are, recognizing where the opportunities are down the road, and particularly in the biomedical and life sciences, putting in place, in partnership with the federal government, in partnership with the state, the necessary infrastructure to support this success. And again, last week in Texas was a great day for Texas and Texas A&M with this very large award that we think will continue to move us forward.
Thank you. I only have about 20 seconds left, so I won't get to ask Mr. Holliday his questions about the outlook for federal and state funding over the next 7 years, and how sometimes they glossed over some fiscal constraints that you have to take into consideration. My time is up. I yield back, but Mr. Holliday, I probably will send you something by letter. I appreciate it if you'll answer it. And Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for being generous and letting me go ahead with my interrogation. And I'm still concerned about my granddaughter, because I know my scholastic record. One time I made 4 F's and a D, and my dad punished me for spending too much time on one subject. I'm not sure that she didn't get a little of that from me. So I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Know that I will defer to your wisdom any time. You just let me know. I want to talk a little bit about our country's financial circumstances, then I'm going to follow that up with a question. Just to reiterate where we are, in November we blew through the $15 trillion debt mark. Sometime this year we're going to blow through the $16 trillion debt mark. We have had 3 consecutive trillion-dollar deficits, 1.4 trillion, 1.3 trillion, 1.3 trillion. We are in our 4th year of what is likely to be a trillion-dollar deficit. What is the impact of all this? In the 2 fiscal years ago, our debt service cost was $196 billion. This past fiscal year that ended September 30th, our debt service cost was $221 billion, which means that we had an increase of $25 billion in a one-year period of time. What does that mean? Well, that's more than the entire NASA budget, 1 year. And we have lost that for future generations where those funds are no longer available for endeavors of a NASA-size quantity. We've got a lot of competing demands for federal government monies. We've got the programs that y'all have brought out. We've got national defense. We've got all sorts of wealth transfer programs, food stamps, government housing, you name it. We have possibilities of significant tax increases, but to be quite frank with you, to balance the budget would require more than a doubling of the income tax rates now being paid by all Americans who pay income taxes. And for those of you with economic background, you can imagine the adverse effects that would have on our economy, the job losses, and whether we would actually have an increase in revenue or a decrease in revenue is an open question. So with that kind of situation in hand, I'm concerned about the report recommendation, particularly the Strategic Investment Program. That's item number 5, along with some of the other recommendations, and whether they are consistent with the outlook for federal and state funding over the next several years. Please expand on how the study committee considered the current fiscal environments in its deliberations. Further, I'm concerned that recommendations for the creation of a new program, and that's the Strategic Investment Program, number 5, that asks for another $7 billion per year, and covering the full cost of research, don't take into account the nation's true economic situation. What are your thoughts on this? I understand how what you do is productive, but if we're going to come up with an additional $7 billion per year, where do you suggest it come from? Or how do you suggest we prioritize? That seems to be the task that Congress is faced with, properly prioritizing how our funds are spent. Mr. Holliday, if you'll go first, but then we'll just work our way down the panel.
Thank you, Chairman Brooks. Excellent point. We discussed that at great length in our committee. As we stressed in the committee, we believe it will take time to fully fund these programs. But what we believe, in response to your question about where it comes from, is we should focus on the things we can control today. Many members of this panel have talked about the regulations that we believe are choking down our universities. In the report, we show 3 examples of universities that have found ways to save $60 to $75 million per year by looking at their own backbone operations, not the research itself, but the support systems, and we believe those should be implemented. Urging companies to partner with universities are a step in the right direction. A simple example from the University of Tennessee and DuPont. We both were working on next generation biofuels. DuPont and University of Tennessee decided to pull together to be much more effective and cut their cost. I think if we put the framework in place where in the short term we can do much more of that. If I could close with the question, though, is it's very important as you're considering deployment of funds to look at what are investments and what are costs. And we would truly believe these are investments that can pay back multiple times, not immediately, but over time to the country.
Dr. Mason, again, if there's any ammunition you can give me in this debate that we're likely to have in the halls of Congress, very much appreciate it.
Yes, Chairman Brooks. From a fiscal point of view, in our state of Alabama and at Auburn University, cuts are very real. We have to make very clear decisions. I will assure you we've had to understand with no new monies are coming in, what do we do? We have made decisions at the local level, as the nation will have to, what will we need to stop doing in order to do other things. On the other hand, we tried to align our capabilities and our facilities with what we looked at national strategic areas. One of those is in the cyber security area. By sharing our research facilities with the private sector, with the federal agencies, with state agencies, and various forms of the private sector, we have been able to pool funding at a certain level to accomplish and create some new opportunities and job creation. So my point is, the reality is, it may not be where all new revenues come from, but I do support the idea the partnering across all areas.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Dr. Seaman?
Yes, thank you. I remind you what you know about, or much better than I, about the federal budget, and that is we exist, the successes that we have talked about today, the innovation that comes from American universities, in a sense, is funded through the federal government out of that very small part of the budget, the discretionary part that's left over when all the big things are funded. So I remind you that from that little bit that's there come future cures for cancer, come solutions to our energy challenges, come answers to our climate change dilemmas, et cetera, et cetera. So at least holding on to the investments that you are making, and thank you for making them, I think are critical down the road for this country to continue to see the extraordinary contributions in the future that we have seen in the past. But I would say, as I said in my remarks, there are responsibilities on both sides, the government and the universities. The first is to focus, is to pick and choose what it is we want to invest in and what we are going to let stand aside for a moment, what we are not going to invest in. And that's often one of the most difficult discussions, both in government and at universities, as to what we will do and what we won't do. Secondly, again, on both sides, as I emphasized and as Mr. Holliday said, I still think there is a great deal of room left for efficiencies. Universities are working every day to be more efficient with the resources that you give us, but we think we can be more efficient. On the other side, the regulatory burdens that are placed on us that we think are above and beyond are extraordinarily costly to our universities, and they directly take dollars away from supporting research itself. They take away dollars from working on cures for cancer. They take away dollars for finding energy solutions. They create burdens on our faculty that may consume up to 40% of a faculty member's time in non-research functions because of that. And that's really not what we want our best and brightest minds working on.
Thank you, Dr. Seaman. I'm in wholehearted agreement. Dr. Tolbert?
Thank you, Chairman Brooks. I would echo everything that my colleagues have said and simply add to what Dr. Seaman just said, that in fact this regulatory burden is growing, and it has an impact on federal spending and university spending. We feel across the universities that internally we must continue to find efficiencies in the way we respond to regulatory oversight in the use of taxpayer funds, but also that we would like to be partners in developing rational policy that will streamline federal regulations. I can think of a couple of areas. One would be in export controls, where there are redundancies and actually inconsistencies in among some of the regulations. They're extremely important regulations. The easier they are to follow, the clearer they are, the less work it will take and the better job we'll do at the universities, and also on the federal side in assuring accountability. That would be one. Another place would be effort reporting as a very specific example of something where we do sort of a whole separate shadow system of following effort on research grants that is probably not necessary and would be a place where we could find efficiencies.
Thank you, Dr. Tolbert. Dr. Cito?
Thank you, Chairman Brooks. We may have reached that point where everything that needs to be said has been said, but not everybody's said it, so I'll just reiterate a couple of points that have been made, because I think they're fairly critical. One is not everything in this report can clearly be implemented in the near term, and there's some fiscal realities which you have pointed out, which I absolutely agree with, that mean that we're going to have to think the strategic program that they suggested may well have to be thought down the road when our economic and fiscal house is in better order. I think the suggestion is still good. It's just not viable at this point. I would just, let me hammer home. if you want to get though, if we want to look at where we can get efficiencies or we can make strides right now, regulations are just burying us, and we really do need to take, as I think was recommended. It wouldn't be that costly to take a very hard look at the regulations now and see where we can streamline some of those. Just to bring up an example that hasn't been brought up, I'm really concerned at Duke at how the conflict of interest regulations are running right up against orthogonal to our attempts to technology transfer. And we talk about, again, speeding up the rate at which technologies get incorporated from the basic discoveries into application. We're that second step. We're running into potholes because the conflict of interest rules are taking the very professors who should be taking that next step out of the picture, or at least marginalizing them to some extent. Again, collaborations, be it with industry, be it with other universities. I think many people in this room would be surprised at how much Duke and the University of North Carolina collaborate on a regular basis, particularly in the biomedical realm. Collaborations are just an excellent way to achieve efficiencies. I could go on, the list is quite long, but I think there are, I guess the bottom line is, I think there are plenty of things in the NRC report where they have recommendations that in fact would either cost much or might not even cost much of anything at all, that need to be looked at very carefully in the near term.
Thank you, Dr. Cito. At this point, I'd like to thank Mr. Lipinski. It's abnormal for two Republicans to go back-to-back, but he and I discussed it, and he was gracious enough to allow the chairman of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee to go first, followed by the chairman of this subcommittee. And Mr. Lipinski, as you engage in your Q&A, I'm not often liberal, but I'll be likewise liberal and generous with your time as you ask questions and seek responses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do have a lot of things I want to explore with the panel, so I appreciate that. So many things, trying to figure out where to start. First thing, I think I just want to quickly make it clear for everybody the situation that public universities are in right now. I think it was Mr. Holliday said that public universities are on thin ice right now. Dr. Tolbert, what's the percentage? Can you tell us again what the percentage is of funding at the University of Arizona that comes directly from the state?
Our current level of funding is in the 20s%. It has fallen 40% in just the last few years.
And I don't know if Dr. Mason or Dr. Seaman can tell us anything about their universities, what percent comes from the state. Do you know?
Congressman Lipinski, I don't know the percentage, but I can do it in a different fashion if you allow me. I arrived at Auburn in 2008, and since 2008, from an $800 million appropriation, over $125 million, I believe, has been reduced. So, proportion, whether that's a proportion of the entire university budget, but the implication of that is profound.
Dr. Seaman, do you have any?
I'm not. It is around the number at the University of Arizona. I came 3 years ago from the University of Rhode Island, and during my tenure there, the percentage of state support slipped below 10%. And I know there are a number of universities that are down at that end of the percentages of state support.
Well, I was going to say Dr. Tolbert's doing relatively well there at University of Arizona, from what I hear, and I hear more along the lines in the state of Illinois. Down closer to what Dr. Seaman is talking about, 10%. I don't think most people in this country understand how they still see state university, and they think that there is a large percentage of the money for those universities that is actually coming directly from the state. So I just want to make that point. Commercialization of university research, I think, is critically important here. We are investing a lot in, the federal government's investing a lot, taxpayers are investing a lot in research at our universities across the country, and I think more needs to be done in commercialization. Is there anything that specifically that anyone can talk about that their universities are doing to help with commercialization? I'll start with Dr. Cito. Is there?
We have, actually, you can go onto the website. Actually, if you look in my written commentary, I actually pointed out we have an innovation and entrepreneurship a program that basically tries to coordinate entrepreneurship across campus. And there we have the Duke Fuqua School of Business, the School of Law, the medical school are all participants in any number. And when I say any number, the numbers, it's about, I think there's 12 different programs that I counted up when I was putting together the written testimony that are various programs that are designed to either educate entrepreneurs or in many instances take actual IP and as a part of the course, develop that IP to try and move it downstream as it goes along. So we really have our strategic plan of several years ago focused on technology transfer and translation of our basic discoveries into application as one of our strategic goals, and we have worked very hard to bring that about. And again, if you look in my written testimony, there's a fairly good list of what we're doing, and I think it's fairly impressive.
I'd also like to comment on what the university is doing. Dr. Tolbert.
Thank you, Chairman. Ranking Member Lipinski. At the University of Arizona, we're changing the way we do technology commercialization because we have not been as efficient and effective as we know we could be. One of the things we've done is to take a new dean of our business college, our College of Management, and give him strong control over the new direction we're taking with something we call Tech Launch Arizona. We have a top-ranked entrepreneurship program, and we are increasingly bringing the students and the faculty into that pipeline from basic research through to technology commercialization. We're bringing in, under one umbrella the functions of technology transfer and business incubation and movement into our technology park. So that we can have an easier handoff so that to the faculty member who is an innovator and an entrepreneur, it will be an easier process than it has been in the past. And finally, I would say we know that we are going to have to raise philanthropic funds to help us through, I think it was my colleague to the left who talked about a valley of death. There are several valleys of death for new intellectual property, and we can't raise those funds anyway except to go out to the private sector and the philanthropic community to help us generate a fund that eventually we expect will be evergreen.
I think Texas A&M is doing all the same things that our peers are, but I would like to use the question in this arena to make a point about the relationship between research at universities and education, and that they are not two separate things at our institutions, but rather they are inextricably linked, even in this arena. It's critical that we teach our young people and our students about what it means and what has to happen to develop, commercialize, market technologies, create new companies. And I'm very proud to say that my office in this past year, in collaboration with our Mays School of Business, has created a student innovation accelerator, bringing some extraordinarily bright students of Texas A&M in partnership with faculties and ideas to create for them a place, an opportunity, the resources to begin thinking about how this happens, and in fact probably if it works like I want, seeing the next Facebook come out of a small investment in putting our students in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that this is all, when we talk about commercialization, it's often lost that what we are talking about is education, educating students, educating faculty on how to commercialize, how to be entrepreneurs. So that's still all part of education. So if Dr. Mason, you don't have to add anything, but if you have anything, go ahead.
Well, I am an academic, so I have to add something, but I'll be
very,
very brief, and I appreciate the chairman's allowing us to do this. Just two comments in transition. So in our incubator, that's what you will also see many universities where we have student companies being formed. What better way than to take this intellectual knowledge right from the students, and the students are starting companies. These are investments that we're talking about. While they often are perceived as costs, but the fact is, imagine investing in our next generation in that manner. Something even more specific, we're making transitions from what used to be referred to as technical licensing officers, a very regulatory type of approach. I oversee our 501c3 technology foundation, and we now hire business development people who come from industry and also bring along with them the private sector investment portfolios and our contacts. So in response to the chairman's question and to yours, literally the private sector is also willing to invest. It's the partnership that we're looking for. So thank you very much for the amount of time.
And I wanted to, as people here have also often heard me say, promote an NSF program called the Innovation Corps that is teaching faculty members and teaming them up with faculty members, graduate students, teaming them up with entrepreneurs and teaching them how to commercialize. And I think that we need to be doing more to sort of bring the best practices from what you all have learned, all our universities have learned, because a lot has been done in the past 20 years, especially in the last decade, when we're talking about tech transfer, commercialization. And there are some different ways that it's being done at different universities, and I think that we really need to collect all the best practices and so that everyone learns from each other. And that last thing I just want to say, I think we could all agree up here in Congress to work on easing the regulatory burden, and I think that's something that we need to address further time in up here on Capitol Hill and making the changes that we can so that the federal government is not putting too many burdens on our universities. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. I appreciate the patience of our two colleagues to my left. The chair first recognizes Mr. Holtgren of the great state of Illinois.
Thank you all for being here. So grateful for your time and your work. I'm passionate about this subject and really do appreciate all that you've done. So much of what you said really struck me. One thing right at the end of Dr. Cito's testimony talked about, almost as a kind of a side comment, but also maybe a challenge of looking at prioritization and how we actually are looking system-wide at basic scientific research and how we're spending money and are we doing it most effectively as we possibly could. I agree with that. I think we need to do that. I'm frustrated being one of the new members here in Congress of feeling like we have very little vision as far as science policy goes for our nation from the government, from our leadership. And we need to change that. We need to be working with you, and I want to be a part of that. I know this committee and subcommittee will be part of that as well. I think part of that discussion, though, has to be not just limited to basic scientific research, but science. And what should we be doing as a federal government? I think this is a really important discussion to have. I'm privileged to have quite a few physicist constituents in my district who are much, much smarter than I am. And they reminded me of that often, but they are a wonderful help. And one of the things that they talk to me about, and it just clicked with me, is there's really two forms of science. There's Newtonian science and Edisonian science. Newtonian science really is basic scientific research. Why does something work? And how are we going to discover new reasons why things work? And Edisonian science is how do we apply it? How do we use what we know to make our lives better? Both are very, very important. I absolutely am convinced that the private sector is very good at the Edisonian science. That if we are continuing to provide advancements in Newtonian science, private sector, for the most part, can step up and take the ball to the next part of applying it to make our lives better. But I'm absolutely convinced that the private sector is not good at Newtonian science, of that basic scientific research. And that's where we need our research universities to continue to step up, to continue to be funded, and I would say continue to work with our national laboratories. We haven't talked about that very much, but I think that is a key piece, and I just feel like right now there's an attack against our national laboratories. I can't see it any other way, where, again, many applied science line items are being increased 30%, 20%, and yet our national laboratories are being cut 10%, 15%. It's just, to me, it's a misapplication of limited dollars that we've got, where the private sector oftentimes can step in and do this applied science. No one other than universities, our national laboratories with federal government's direction can really do this basic scientific research. So I want to be a part of that discussion. We need your help. I think you are a really key resource in this, along with our national laboratories, to be able to do that. One of the things I would challenge you all with, and I've talked to my own universities about this as well, I'm privileged to represent Fermilab, so that's how I get my connection of all my brilliant physicists that I get to represent. But I'm so proud of what they've done and the great work that they've done, but also sense frustration from them right now of really getting the support that they need to do the great work that I know they can do moving us into the future. But I've encouraged them to continue to build the relationships with their research universities and have research universities reaching out to their members of Congress and members of the Senate to be talking about how important this is. We all talk and believe in the importance of STEM education and getting young people interested in this, but we're not going to get them interested if there's not a place for them to be able to use that knowledge and education here in America. If they've got to go over to China afterwards to be able to use that, or Russia, or India, or Europe, we have lost the battle. And so I encourage you just to continue to be talking to your members of Congress of how important this is. I've seen it very practically where there's been issues where I've tried to talk to one of my colleagues and say, hey, I need your help to sign on to this legislation. We don't get an answer. Finally, we'll call a university in their district. University president calls this person. 5 minutes later, they're on our letter. So you have a power, and I just encourage you to continue to use it. We need to hear from you of how important this is for current students at your universities, for your professors, for the research they're doing, but also for our K through 12th graders who are interested in going into science and yet are saying, maybe there's not a bright future for me in that, and I'll go somewhere else. No, we can't let that happen. It's too important. So I'm getting up on a soapbox. I apologize for that. But real quickly, in the last minute I have, one of the questions I had was brought up of regulation and the amount of time that's used dealing with regulation. And specifically, it wondered if one or two of you could maybe mention what reform could happen. What are some of the frustrations you have that's pulling you away from the research that could be done, and some regulatory reform that we could be doing to free up our research universities to do the great work that they can do? Great, thank you.
Congressman Holgren, thank you for that question. Between the two of us at this end of the table, we have suggested a couple of areas. There are many areas. I think this really deserves significant attention. Many areas where we can imagine important efficiencies are available that will not decrease our accountability. We will be held accountable for spending the dollars correctly. One is conflict of interest, which you heard about from Dr. Cito, and another one is effort reporting. It's an area that's too technical to go into in detail here, but we really do have parallel shadow systems, which is just really not necessary. It's not a good waste of time.
Yeah.
It is a good waste of time.
It is a waste of time.
Excuse me. And then the other I would bring up again is export control. It's increasingly difficult. Dual use is an important issue that has to be dealt with in great technical detail. But in fact, I think most universities have had to hire external legal counsel to help us interpret the ITAR, the International Trade in Arms Regulation guidelines, because they are virtually uninterpretable by us internally. And I think that could be improved. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Again, thank you all. If you have other suggestions, and if it's okay if I can ask permission to follow up with you or my office to follow up with you of specifics of what we can do, because I want to go after some of this. And again, we want accountability, and I believe we can still have an accountable system without some of this crazy redundancy, without this waste of time, without a lot of things that are just outdated, that just don't make sense any longer, or new ways of doing something more efficiently. My time is up, so thank you so much. I'll be following up with you if that's okay, just to get other suggestions you might have. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Holgren. At this point, the chair recognizes the chairman of our Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee, Mr. Palazzo from the great state of Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lipinski brought up some good points when he was talking about commercialization and entrepreneurship. And I think Dr. Tolbert and Dr. Cito, you pretty much covered those. But as a follow-up question, this was going to be for Mr. Holliday. So if you could just put your entrepreneurship caps back on. When the study committee was assessing the needs of our research universities, did you discover that most research campuses now have tech transfer offices, or is it still a major impediment to moving research out of the labs? And also, how about entrepreneurship programs like the ones Dr. Tolbert and Dr. Cito mentioned in their testimony?
A great question, sir. Yes, universities have tech transfer offices, but they're not as efficient and effective as they should be. From my experience with DuPont, we actually deployed 3 of our best tech transfer people to go around and coach universities on how to do that. We put in place a net company where they could actually sell that from. So we think that's a very important place. But what I would stress is if we start early on with partnering with entrepreneurs, partnering with businesses as they're developing the technology, then those routes to transfer it out become much more obvious. And the technology is more fit for commercialization. We find most discovery research at university is not ready to be commercialized. It still may take a year or 2 to be done. So you've got to find the right partner to actually commercialize it, and that's what's critical.
Thank you. Mr. Mason, in your testimony, you mentioned that Auburn's Space Research Institute was recently closed. What happened to the students, professors, and researchers who had been working at and through the Institute?
Yes, Congressman. When we all take on new jobs, you open a door and then you have to deal with what's behind the door. In that situation, the university had been trying to sustain the operations of that Space Research Institute. When I arrived there, the funding was not available through NASA and through others. Fortunately, over a 4-year period, we were able to, through attrition, some people were absorbed in other units. Several of them went out and started some small companies. And then some of the facilities are now going to be shared with the University of Alabama at Huntsville. So in reality, it was the productivity of trying to sustain something in separation from, so we primarily allocated it to the locations that were best suited for trying to continue it. But the fact is that no longer exists at that university. So if one were to stand up some new initiatives, one has to recognize that infrastructure and that personnel are not there. So whether it's my university or others, when we go through these cuts, that's what will happen. Things will have to be redeployed elsewhere. That'll cause some inefficiencies to start them up again.
Dr. Mason, that was well said. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this point, I'm going to close with one set of remarks, and I've focused on recommendation number 7 from your report. And it's one that the committee and its witnesses have focused on extensively, reducing regulatory burdens. And it seems to me that to a large degree we've been talking at the 30,000-foot level, maybe even haven't gotten down to the 10,000-foot level, but as much as possible, I would ask our witnesses and their colleagues to get into the weeds a little bit. With respect to recommendation number 7, it says, and I'm going to quote some particular parts, federal policymakers and regulators and their state counterparts should review the costs and benefits of federal and state regulations, eliminating those that are redundant, ineffective, and appropriately applied to the higher education sector or that impose costs that outweigh the benefits to society. The federal government should also make regulations and reporting requirements more consistent across federal agencies so that universities can maintain one system for all federal requirements rather than several, thereby reducing costs. Reducing or eliminating regulations can reduce administrative costs, enhance productivity, and increase the agility of institutions. If you would, I would appreciate it if y'all could get some of your colleagues and yourselves to get into the weeds a little bit and identify specific regulations that you think that this Congress should be involved in the change of or the repeal of. I would very much welcome that kind of in-the-weeds insight that you can share with us, this committee, in written form. You can also address my congressional office in a written summary of the regulations that I'm talking about with the CFRs. If you can identify them by number and section, that would be wonderful. I was going to close my remarks at this point, but I see Dr. Cito has his hand going up. So if you'd like to add a few remarks, and as much as I do have a degree from your university, I feel great deference.
I appreciate taking advantage of that, and thank you for recognizing me. I would just like to point out we can do that relatively easily in point of fact, because last summer, in response to the OMB A21 task force, they asked for examples of where we saw regulatory burdens, and we've actually, through the AAU, the auspices of AAU and COGR, have actually developed a whole list of in-the-weeds regulations that we think could use some help. So it'll be a very easy thing for us to put together, because we've done that within the past year.
Well, fantastic. If you could please communicate that list to the subcommittee staff and to my office, along with any justifications or reasonings, explanations as to why that particular provision needs to be changed or eliminated, I very much welcome it. And I would love to be your champion with respect to overregulation by the federal government. I'm familiar with the well-intentioned but sometimes counterproductive effect some of our regulators have in the federal government. With that being the case, I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. In particular, I want to thank Mr. Lipinski for allowing the chairman of the overall committee, Mr. Hall, to go out of order. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments from members. The witnesses are excused, and this hearing is adjourned.